Доброго дня, шановні.
Good morning, dear ladies and gentlemen. We continue working day at Ukraine Crisis Media Center. The topic is presentation of the law project on the cancellation of electronic sites in the field of property appraisal. Our speakers are Viktor, Chumak, People's Deputy of Ukraine, Oksana Velychko, Coordinator of the Government Public Initiative Together Against Corruption, Mikhailo Serebryakov, Project Manager of the Government Public Initiative Together Against Corruption, Andriy Marusov, activist, and Simonova, American Assessment Association. First floor is given to Mr. Chumak. So maybe Andriy Marusov is going to tell us the first word. Thank you, Viktor Vasilievich. We thank you all who gathered here today. I would like to tell you the story, how this scheme was formed. And once again, this scheme is old. It is happened when tender chamber was formed 10 years ago, and intermediaries, artificial intermediaries were created, and they got this corrupt rent. In 2009-2010, there were first corruptive attempts to launch the same corrupt multi-billion scheme at the market of property assessment. Fortunately, at that time, we were able to stop it, and what we see now, this is the revival of the same scheme, when anyone who buys property have to give some part, some share to these corrupt intermediaries. And what I want to say is, once again, if we are not able to stop it now, it will spread like cancer. Property assessment for corrupt people, this is only a beginning. This is big money, but big corruptive money, they are also in Prozoro sales, and also we have some platforms for electronic commerce, and these platforms, they are intermediary. So through legislation and normative acts, corrupt individuals want to get these platforms under control, and they will be able to do this. And now we see that they bought the main bodies of power, starting from the Supreme Council, from the Verkhovna Rada. And it is important to stop, to ruin this scheme at its beginning, because it didn't spread to these buying through online operations. So you should understand the background, the corrupt background of what is going on now. Viktor Chumak, People's Deputy of Ukraine, leader of Громадянський movement Хвиля, the wave. So about this draft law that we are going to register, and I believe that it will be signed by 5 or 6 deputies, and I believe that we will be able to get about 20 signatures. And it happens so that sometimes draft laws appear, and they provide opportunities for some new monopolies, Ukrainian monopolies. So there are many monopolies in the markets and we live in the country where economic monopoly for energy or economic monopoly on some other natural resources. These monopolies, they get through all the economy, and there are many people who abuse the situation, and they provide regulations that prevent business from developing. So together with the initiative Together Against Corruption, we had a meeting with representatives of Anti-Monopoly Committee, You should understand that we were discussing this scheme that exists now, and also we spoke about many problems that exist in monopoly regulation and administrative regulations and procedures. This is not only about this scheme. We have a lot of schemes like this, and there are monopoly schemes, and these schemes are not easy to see sometimes, for example, in the sphere of ritual services, and also in gambling and the use of platforms for these businesses. These businesses of gambling, they are not completely legal. So we started to speak about the monopoly in the sphere of this property assessment sites. So this is the attempt to build the monopoly, to create oligarch system that will be based on obligation of all the participants of the market to pay intermediary cost to some structures that do not do anything. And if we think about what it is, this assessment of property, so this is not commercial but fiscal service of the state, and this should be paid by people to the state, and there should be proper procedures in place. And I believe that this draft law should be adopted. We should cancel all these assessment platforms, and maybe you know that this law was adopted in a natural way. Let's say it clear. Maybe this is appropriate to this government, but this Verkhovna Rada is not normal, and this draft law was adopted in the budget's night, and they provided 7 amendments from 7, I would say, political and economic groups in order to satisfy their own interests. And one of these amendments, this amendment from Vidrodzhenia, it provided necessary votes, and it was brought into this budget process. So this is the price of the Ukrainian budget. Big corrupt hole that was provided by Antony Tsenka, People's Deputy. So this is not the first time when he did it. He is the master of manipulation, and tomorrow I will have an unpleasant conversation with my colleague, and we should face the situation. If he is the father of 10 chambers, so we will face the situation. This is the situation that we should deal with. So I understand that someone closes his eyes on this, but this creation of monopoly, it is based on some legislative acts, and this is the main danger, because the state does not cancel the monopoly, and it helps the monopolies to be created, and there are conflict of interests for legislators, and legislators should not get profit from such laws. And I believe that this draft law should be signed, and we should lobby it. And also I believe that here we should build a broad coalition, very broad coalition among public activists, broad coalition of legislators, journalists who write about these topics, investigators, in order to show how much money is taken out of the pockets of Ukrainians and goes to those individuals who build the scheme. It's about 1.5 million a day. So you may calculate how much money they can earn from this. So I believe that this is a light assessment of the situation. This is a moderate assessment. So you may think how much money laundered through the scheme. So this draft law is to cancel the draft laws that provided the opportunity to create this scheme and to go to the fiscal activity in this area provided by the state. Thank you. Oksana Velychko. I will continue. So we all have such a wonderful tradition during New Year's night when we drink champagne. We make our wishes, and the deputies, they have their budget night. And the budget is necessary for the country, and in order it to be adopted, they blackmail the parliament and the government, and they vote for this budget only if their interests are well presented in this document. So we have these budgets like a roll with raisins. In these raisins, they represent the interests of these people. And the deputy was mentioned whose interests are presented in this legislation. So this is the idea of the platforms that just earn money and do nothing else. We may speak about Ostap Bender when he collected money for some raven and in order to support this raven. So these monopolies, they we may say that these platforms are not the good, that they are rather good idea if they were able to compete among themselves or provide some other services. But this is impossible because for the budget of 2019, the amendment was added, and if one more platform wants to join the market, it should ask whether other platforms are ready to accept them and to help them to reduce the prices for their services. So no platform would provide such an answer, and now they created conditions for creation of such monopoly. And we are grateful to Viktor and other colleagues for the attempt to cancel these electronic sites in order to get another system for property assessment. Also, starting the summer, we fight with the scheme. We're trying to do something at the level of the Cabinet of Ministers, but also the Cabinet of Ministers, they are hostages of this process, and the Cabinet of Ministers, by its decision, also voted on the resolution about the free of charge nature of these platforms. So now corrupt scheme is included into the legislation. Now we should cancel those amendments. And starting summer, this person, they pressure us, and they address my relatives. They sent discredited pictures to me, and also sanctions were put in place, and now we have full-fledged discreditation campaign, smear campaign, and they say that I have some property, that I stole some property in the course of my anti-corruption activities, and I provide proper information on Facebook, and I'm ready to speak with the media, and we all see it as a blackmail, as a pressure, because my parents, they really are concerned of the situation. And I would like to say that despite all those things that are ongoing, we will not stop. And we had Maidan, and we want to live without those ugly schemes, and no one wants to stop. We are going to continue and to reach the result, to have this transparent and fair market and clear rules of the game. And we hope for support of the deputies. Many of them understand the scheme, and we wrote messages to deputies during this budget night. We asked them not to vote for these amendments, and they said that they know that this is corruption, but they said that there will be default otherwise, and they were forced to vote for these amendments. And we should correct the situation, and now deputies may correct with this situation the hostages of which they became. Good afternoon. Ludmila Simonova. And I'm the lead assessment of the American Union, and I also helped with assessment in Ukraine from the very start, and I would like to tell our view on the situation and the scheme. So some known people tried to introduce the scheme starting 2010. In 2012 and 2013, they tried to introduce it, and in 2013 they introduced it, and in 2014 the scheme was cancelled after the Revolution of Dignity, and the scheme was called the most corrupt in the history of Ukraine. And despite this, everything returned back in 2017 when Mr. Kurechi said that he does not know what assessment means and what IT means. And he provided these notorious amendments due to which these platforms appeared. And starting 2018, these platforms were launched into operation, and they started to take money for their services. Imagine this. For example, there is an assessor, there is a state register, single database of assessment, and there is an intermediary, this platform, that takes information from the assessor and provides it to the single database for registration. Why do we need this intermediary if everything worked well without this intermediary? Moreover, when they started to get money, there was a decree of the Cabinet of Ministers 358, and it said that the registration is for free. But until 21st of November 2018, they were taking this money. So who will be responsible for this? Who will be responsible for the violations of the resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers? And Oksana said what happened on two budget nights, first in December 2017, and next in November 2018. So this was a blackmail by the Vidrodzhenia faction of all the deputies when they declared you should vote for these amendments or there won't be any budget in Ukraine. And we all understand the priorities, and for the deputies, budget was a priority because the country needs to move forward. And now we should correct the situation. And I will be grateful to all the deputies who will promote these changes to the tax code that were developed with participation of the organization Together Against Corruption, and they promote this idea everywhere now. And I agree with Mr. Chumak that all should work together in order to adopt these amendments and in order to correct the situation in the parliament. Thank you very much. Mikhailo Serebryakov. I represent the organization Together Against Corruption, and I would like to ask to be heard. First, Yatsenko and Gritsak. They mentioned Gritsak and one known deputy. And I have a question. Why didn't you see this evident things? What is going on actually? What is the situation? And I asked the journalists, because after we initiated some instruments to overcome corruption or to weaken corruption scheme, we were provided with some telephone calls or some personal visits, and people come with some threats, and maybe some people will come to you and ask you to shut up, or to tell some bad things about those who want to cancel this corrupt scheme. And we ask you to be firm as journalists, because this scheme is really unfair and it robs Ukrainians. And I address notaries and assessors. Maybe it's not pleasant for you to say that you need to have 1,300 and to provide it to someone in order to register this assessment report. And I would like to address Ukrainians. Each Ukrainian who sells some property, a flat or any other property, you pay to retailers, to notary, to the state, you pay taxes. And why should you pay to the platforms that do not provide you any services? So some people are just introduced this norm into the law, and some legislative bodies also cover up the scheme on the executive level. I believe that I can pay 1,300. This is not big money for me. Maybe some people who are here today, maybe they can find 1,300 hryvnias. But if we are speaking about regional centers and villages, 1,300, this is not such a small sum. So why do you want to pay someone, to people, to provide this money to some, for example, people in Cherkasy, and then they use this money for the elections, and so they are now in the market of assessment of shares. They will also want to interfere to Prozoro and other platforms. So these people may spread corruption everywhere, and there are some first past the post deputies, and you may and you should ask deputies to implement the legislation. And some deputies also, during the budget nights, they said that they cannot do anything, and now they should correct this law. And Poroshenko, the president, he can help on this. And also the committees, anti-corruption and tax committee headed by Yuzhanina, they should consider this draft law, and Andriy Marusov should immediately introduce it to the whole, and I would like to see those deputies who won't support it. And now you have the opportunity to correct the situation, because before you were powerless, and now you have the priority to consider it in the Supreme Council and to positively vote for this draft law, and the president should sign this document, otherwise this will be a treason. So I would like to answer as a deputy. I would like to say that today in the hall we have about 16 candidates for presidency. And I will address them personally, and I will ask them to sign this draft law. And then we will make this public, who signed or who didn't. And I will address everyone personally. We will see who will respond and how they will respond to this proposal. If you have questions, please raise your hand and ask the speaker. Good afternoon, Yuri Nikolov, Our Money news outlet. There was an argument that there should be responsibility for those who developed this legislation, but this responsibility is eroded because of the rules. And the tax code, this order 450. I have a question. Maybe at some stage there was some norm that introduced these platforms into the overall discourse, because there was provision of the Cabinet of Ministers. It was made in 2018, and where can we search for these names, the names of those people who are responsible? Maybe we can send requests somewhere in order to get this information, to clarify the situation. So we should say that the draft law that is proposed it proposes to limit the payment 0.5% of the minimal salary as of 1st January this year. So there are recommendations of the Anti-Monopoly Committee, and really a lot of things happened during these months, from the introduction of the single base, and there is a recommendation of Anti-Monopoly Committee, and they ask the Cabinet of Ministers whether these platforms are needed. If they are needed, maybe the payment should be limited. But unfortunately, the Cabinet of Ministers and the State Property Fund, they do not respond on the requests of the Anti-Monopoly Committee. That's why we had to introduce it into the proposals to the draft law and to set this limitation in payment. I would like to remind to you that until 18 of June, these platforms worked, and this is the matter how to write it correctly, how to write these procedures correctly. So I would like to remind to you, and it was said by Viktor, he said that this is a service that the state provides in the whole world, this service. So in order to in the whole world they do it. So if people sell and buy something, they should not pay to the state additionally for this agreement. So the proposal is 0.5% of the minimal salary, and it says that the single base should be supported. And the State Property Fund, they do not have a lot of money for these things. That's why we propose such a mechanism. Going back to the question, if we look at all the scheme and how it developed, at first glance, we believe that we should search for those who are responsible, who started it in the parliament, and this committee of Yuzhanina, and Yuzhanina who insisted on this. And also we may look at draft laws that appeared and fortunately were not adopted concerning this scheme. We may dig even deeper. When, for the first time, this norm for payment appeared, it was in March 2018. So the State Property Fund started all this process, and then there was the provision of the Cabinet of Ministers about free of charge services, and for the first time, it was said that it should be based on civil agreements, and we all understand, all the journalists and activists, they understand that in corrupt schemes, those terms, the words, they really mean a lot. And when it appeared for the first time, you know that these documents are accessible online. And we see that it was adopted by the State Property Fund. And who introduced this norm? For example, for journalists, for people, deputies, they can send requests, and also law enforcement bodies, they may identify who was the author. And we understand that from the experience of the TEND committee, we understand that other people help, but many officials, they just get this corruption rent. But other people elaborate those schemes. And these people are also present in the parliament, and to see who is the author, who is really responsible for these norms. I believe that the first document, this was the tender documentation from the State Property Fund. And with the help of this document, you may see where all these corrupt ideas and schemes, how these schemes were implemented. And it can be used in order to bring to responsibility those who lobbied those schemes. I would like to add, and I would like to thank Yuri Nikolov, who really actively studies this scheme, and Zagrebelska also contribute a lot in order to overcome corrupt scheme. And maybe there should be a timeline created, and we should understand that the scheme was planned a year ahead. So when it is introduced, it is well thought through and well implemented. And the State Property Fund quickly worked with the documents, and also the platforms got their documents from proper bodies quickly, and the situation was extremely favorable for them to create the scheme. So answering your question, we understand your request. You, as a journalist, want to know who is responsible, and this is the correct position. And I would like to say briefly who is responsible. So, end beneficiaries, authors, initiated people's deputies, the president who signed this, cabinet of ministers, and activists like us. We deal with this problem, but we should do it more firmly. And a lot of things we got later that we should. And so a group of deputies, they just introduced their interests in the document. And all those people, they have their responsibilities. And these people said that they cannot do and couldn't do anything. They are powerless. And those who are at the top level, they said that they wanted to adopt the budget, and they cannot just sacrifice the budget of 3 billion for the sake of some millions. So we may believe these people, but we will have the draft law that cancel this electronic sites and will prevent these electronic sites from existence, because many people want to benefit from this. This draft law will have many authors and a lot of responsible names, committees of the Supreme Council and anti-corruption and legal bodies. So and also on the site of the Supreme Council there are names of those who are responsible from the committees, and those people, starting from Ms. Yuzhanina, these people may consider this draft law, and they did it before, and there is a committee and the head of the Supreme Council or his deputy who will consider this in the whole, and the leaders of faction who deal with these issues. And also there is the president of Ukraine who may sign or may not sign, and also there is the support of the ministry or the head of the state property fund. They may provide their opinion, they may counteract, they may oppose this. So those people who said that they were forced to do this, for them this will be verification. And I asked the journalists to consider any delay in this issue and consider it a treason. Many people participated in the development of this draft law in order to cancel this scheme, and it will be adopted if and this draft law, it doesn't need a second reading at all. It should be adopted during the first reading. Thank you. If you do not have further questions, we thank you for your attention and wish you a good day. Thank you.